In this briefing, we're examining how to build analytical capability that serves multiple critical needs, diagnosing why growth stalled, predicting what's likely to happen next before it shows up in revenue, tracking whether your strategy is actually working through key results, and understanding team health before problems become crises. We'll focus primarily on root cause analytics since that's typically the urgent need when growth plateaus, but the systems we're building serve all of these purposes. A quick note on format. What you're hearing is the synthesis of experts' published research and frameworks. We have worked to represent their ideas accurately whilst translating them to your specific growth. That is, a CEO building the organisational capabilities that enable growth. We'll hear from Douglas Hubbard, creator of Applied Information Economics and author of How to Measure Anything. His work demonstrates that even seemingly immeasurable aspects of business performance can be quantified to reduce decision-making uncertainty. Eliyahu Goldratt's theory of constraints provides systematic tools for tracing symptoms back to root causes through logical cause and effect analysis. Alistair Kroll and Benjamin Yoskovich, authors of Lean Analytics, show us how to distinguish actionable metrics that reveal causation from vanity metrics that merely describe symptoms. These are not abstract theories. They're frameworks for building the analytical capability that helps you understand why growth has stalled, predict what's coming next, and track whether your interventions are working. Here are Douglas Hubbard's perspectives. Hubbard's central argument in How to Measure Anything challenges a fundamental assumption that blocks effective analytics, the belief that certain business factors are immeasurable. According to Hubbard's research across hundreds of organisations, this perception of immeasurability is the single largest obstacle to understanding what actually drives performance. When CEOs say they can't measure organisational effectiveness, customer satisfaction, or innovation capability, they're usually operating under three misconceptions about measurement itself. Hubbard defines measurement not as achieving perfect precision, but as a quantifiably expressed reduction of uncertainty based on one or more observations. This reframing is crucial. You don't need perfect data to understand what's driving your stalled growth. You need to reduce your uncertainty about which factors matter most. Even imperfect measurements, Hubbard demonstrates, dramatically improve decision-making compared to relying solely on intuition. His Applied Information Economics framework provides a systematic approach through 5 steps. First, define the decision problem and identify which variables would make your decisions easier if you understood them better. For a growth mandate CEO, this might be, what's preventing us from converting qualified leads to customers? Or, why did growth slow from 30 to 5% annually? Or, which leading indicators reliably predict churn 6 months out? Second, determine what you actually know right now. Hubbard emphasises calibrated estimation, quantifying your current uncertainty using ranges and probabilities rather than single-point estimates. Instead of saying sales cycle length increased, express it as I'm 90% confident sales cycle length is between 75 and 120 days, compared to 60 to 90 days last year. This precision in uncertainty reveals where you need better information. Third, calculate the value of additional information for each variable. Hubbard's research shows that organisations often collect vast amounts of data on low-value questions, whilst remaining ignorant about high-value drivers. The expected value of information calculation helps you focus measurement efforts where reducing uncertainty has the highest payoff for decision-making. For stalled growth companies with limited resources, that prioritisation is essential. You cannot afford to measure everything, so measure what matters most. Fourth, measure enough to reduce your uncertainty to the point where the decision becomes clear. Hubbard demonstrates that you typically need far less data than you think. His rule of 5 shows that a random sample of just 5 observations has a 93.75% chance of falling between the median of the entire population, meaning 5 data points can dramatically reduce uncertainty about a larger pattern. Fifth, make your decision and re-evaluate periodically. Measurement isn't a one-time event, but a continuous process of updating your understanding as new information becomes available. Hubbard's approach to decomposition is particularly powerful for building analytical capability. When faced with something that seems immeasurable, break it into components that are far more observable. Revenue growth seems abstract, but it decomposes into customers acquired, customers retained, average order value, and purchase frequency. And each of those decompose further. Customer acquisition breaks into leads generated, conversion rate, and sales cycle length. Continue decomposing until you reach the things that you can directly observe and measure. According to Hubbard's research, most immeasurables become quite measurable through this decomposition process. Organisational effectiveness might seem fuzzy, but it manifests in observable outcomes, project completion rates, decision-making speed, cross-functional coordination time, and execution quality. Customer satisfaction is composed of usage frequency, feature adoption, support ticket volume, renewal rates, and Net Promoter Score responses. Innovation capability shows up in ideas generated, experiments run, time to learn, time to market for new features, and the percentage of revenue from recent innovations. Hubbard warns against what he calls a measurement inversion, the tendency to measure what's easy rather than what matters. His research across hundreds of IT projects found that organisations spent enormous resources measuring low-value factors, whilst remaining ignorant about high-value performance drivers. One organisation spent over $1 million measuring software development productivity against lines of code written, a metric that had no correlation with the business outcomes and actually encouraged worse code quality. Meanwhile, they spent nothing on measuring whether projects delivered the intended business benefits. For building analytical capability, Hubbard's framework means starting with the decisions you need to make. What should we change to speed up growth? But also, what early signals predict problems quarters before they hit revenue? And are our strategic initiatives moving the drivers we expected? So then work backwards to identify which measurements would reduce uncertainty about those decisions. Don't measure things because they're easy to measure or because everyone measures them. Measure what would actually change your actions if you knew the answer. Hubbard's work on collaborated estimation addresses another critical challenge: overconfidence. His research shows that most managers are poorly calibrated in their estimates. They express high confidence about the things that they're quite uncertain about. Through training in calibration techniques, managers can learn to express their uncertainty more accurately, thereby revealing where additional measurements would provide the most value. The practical application for growth mandate CEOs? When growth stalls, resist the temptation to immediately launch initiatives based on intuition. Instead, use Hubbard's framework to identify your highest uncertainty, highest value questions. Quantify your current uncertainty about potential root causes. Calculate which additional measurements would most reduce uncertainty. Then design minimal measurements, often much simpler than you'd expect, to test which factors are actually driving the storm. But Hubbard's framework is not just diagnostic. Once you've built these decomposed metrics models with validated causal relationships, they then become predictive. The same leading indicators that help you diagnose why something went wrong will also signal when problems are emerging before they show up in outcomes. According to Hubbard's research, organisations that build this measurement capability gain an enormous strategic advantage. They can intervene quarters earlier because they're monitoring the right leading indicators rather than waiting for lagging outcomes to deteriorate. Hubbard's research demonstrates that breakthrough analytical insights rarely require sophisticated statistics or big data infrastructure. They require clarity about what you're trying to decide, an honest assessment of your current uncertainty, and a strategic collection of small amounts of highly relevant information. For CEOs working with limited resources to drive growth, a measurement capability is essential. You cannot afford extensive analysis paralysis, but you also can't afford to act on the wrong diagnosis. What we love about this is that Hubbard gives us the critical foundation. Analytical capability starts with recognizing that even fuzzy performance drivers can be measured by reducing uncertainty through strategic observation. The key is decomposing complex problems into observable components and focusing measurement efforts where reducing uncertainty has the highest decision value. For you, this efficiency matters enormously. You cannot afford to measure everything, nor can you afford analysis paralysis. Hubbard's framework helps you focus on the 3 to 5 measurements that would most change your actions if you knew the answers, whether you're diagnosing root causes, building predictable models, or tracking strategic progress. But measurement alone doesn't reveal causation. You need systematic tools for tracing symptoms back to their root causes through logical cause and effect relationships. Here's a synthesis of Eliyahu's Goldratt perspectives. Goldrat's theory of constraints, introduced in his 1984 book The Goal, provides systematic tools for causal analysis that cut through organisational complexity. According to Goldrat's framework, the most organisational problems aren't caused by multiple interdependent issues, but by a small number of core conflicts that generate numerous visible symptoms. Organisations waste enormous energy treating symptoms, what Goldrat calls firefighting, whilst the root cause persists and multiply. Goldrat's thinking processes provide structured methods for tracing symptoms back to root causes. The current reality tree, CRT, is the primary diagnostic tool. According to Goldrat's approach, you start by identifying undesirable effects, UDEs, the symptoms that you're experiencing. For you, UDEs might include revenue growth, customer acquisition costs, sales cycle, declining win rates, and increased employee turnover. The CRT methodology involves connecting those UDEs through logical cause and effect relationships, reading from bottom to top using if-then statements. If marketing generates unqualified leads, then sales spends time on poor fit prospects. If sales spends time on poor fit prospects, then qualified leads receive less attention. If qualified leads receive less attention, then conversion rates decline. If conversion rates decline, then revenue growth stalls. Goldratt emphasises that effective root cause analysis must trace back through multiple levels of causation. According to his framework, most organisations stop too early. They identify an immediate cause and declare victory. But that immediate cause itself has causes. Marketing generates unqualified leads. Why? Perhaps because marketing doesn't understand the current ideal customer profile. Why don't they understand the ICP? Perhaps the ICP evolved as you moved up market, but that evolution was never explicitly communicated cross-functionally. If you can trace 70% or more of your undesirable effects back to a single root cause, you've found what Goldratt calls the core conflict or core problem, solving that one issue that can eliminate most visible symptoms at once, rather than fighting each symptom individually. Goldratt's effect cause-effect technique provides validation for causal relationships. Once you propose that factor A causes effect B, you test that hypothesis by predicting, if A truly causes B, what other effects should we observe? If those predicted effects are present, your causal theory gains credibility. If they're absent, you may have identified correlation rather than causation. According to Goldratt's framework, root causes typically fall into one of 3 categories: policies, measurements, or behaviour. Policies are explicit or implicit rules about how work gets done. Measurements are the metrics by which people are held accountable. Behaviours are the actions people take in response to those policies and measurements. Goldratt's research showed that most performance problems trace back to policies or measurements that made sense in the past but no longer serve the current objectives. So for you, this is particularly relevant. Goldratt would argue that the organisation's current policies and measurements were optimised for a different growth stage or market condition. What worked at 10 million revenue may actively constrain growth at 25 million. The sales compensation structure designed for land and expand might discourage enterprise deals. The decision-making process that enabled speed at 50 employees creates bottlenecks at 150 employees. Goldratt's evaporating cloud technique addresses the deeper conflicts beneath visible problems. According to this framework, organisations can oscillate between competing approaches because they face genuine dilemmas, 2 needs that seem mutually exclusive. For example, we need to standardize process for efficiency conflicts with we need flexibility to serve diverse customer segments. Root cause analysis must surface and resolve those underlying conflicts rather than simply choosing one side. The 5 focusing steps, Goldratt's core methodology for addressing constraints, provides a systematic approach to intervention once root causes are identified. First, identify the constraint, the factor that's most limiting performance. Second, exploit the constraint. Optimize how you use that limiting resource. Third, subordinate everything else to the constraint. Align other processes to support maximum throughput through the constraint. Fourth, elevate the constraint. Add capacity if needed. Fifth, repeat, because once you've addressed one constraint, another will emerge. Goldratt's work emphasizes that constraints shift over time. What limits growth today won't limit growth tomorrow. According to his framework, this is why causal analysis must be continuous rather than a one-time diagnostic. The analytical systems you build should help you identify when new constraints emerge so that you can adapt your focus accordingly. This continuous monitoring serves multiple purposes. It helps you diagnose new problems as they emerge. It provides early warning when leading indicators shift. And it tracks whether your strategic interventions are actually removing the constraints that they were designed to address. Goldratt specifically warns against local optimization, improving individual metrics or departments that sub-optimize the overall system. His research repeatedly demonstrated that optimizing parts in isolation often worsens total system performance. If you optimize for lead volume without considering sales capacity to handle those leads, you overwhelm sales and reduce overall conversion rates. Causal analysis must examine system-level dynamics, not just individual component performance. According to Goldratt's framework, effective root cause analysis requires explicit articulation of assumptions underlying your current approach. In the evaporating cloud technique, you identify the assumptions connecting each element of the conflict. Then you test whether those assumptions are actually true or whether they're outdated beliefs that are no longer held. Often, Goldratt found the core conflict evaporates when you surface and challenge an assumption that everyone treated as an immutable truth. But that's exactly just historical convention. For you, Goldratt's framework suggests the growth rate itself is a symptom, the visible effect of an underlying constraint that has changed or emerged. Your task isn't to fix sales or improve marketing, but to identify which constraint is now limiting throughput, i.e. revenue growth, when perhaps it wasn't before. The analytical process is tracing visible symptoms through cause and effect chains back to that change constraint and then systematically addressing it. Goldratt's approach also provides clarity about when to stop analysis and start action. According to his framework, perfect information is neither required or possible. Once you've identified a root cause that explains 70% plus of your undesirable effects, you have a sufficient understanding to act. The remaining 30% can be addressed as you go. Waiting for complete certainty is in itself a constraint on organizational velocity. The current reality trees and cause and effect logic Goldratt developed for diagnosis also serve other purposes once they're built. They become your framework for tracking strategic progress. You can monitor whether interventions are moving the specific causal factors they were designed to move. They provide structure for team health conversations. Many organizational constraints relate to capability, coordination, or cultural factors that show up as early warning signs before they become crises. The same logical rigor that helps you diagnose problems helps you predict where problems might emerge and track whether solutions are working. What we really like about this is that Goldratt provides the systematic tools for connecting symptoms through cause and effect logic back to root causes. His framework is particularly powerful for growth mandate CEOs because it acknowledges that what worked at one stage becomes the constraint the next. The very systems that enabled early growth often become the very thing that prevent further growth. The current reality tree methodology gives you a structured way to trace multiple symptoms back to common causes, whilst the effect-cause-effect technique helps you validate whether you've identified true causation versus mere correlation. But these same causal maps become your infrastructure for monitoring leading indicators and tracking whether strategic initiatives are moving the right drivers. Now we need to understand which specific metrics reveal causation versus the ones that simply describe the problem. That's where lean analytics provides crucial distinctions. Here's a synthesis of Alistair Crowell and Benjamin Yoskostovich perspective. Lean analytics addresses a fundamental problem in an organisational measurement. Most companies drown in data whilst remaining blind to causation. Their framework, built on Eric Ries's lean startup methodology, focuses on the measure portion of the build, measure, learn cycle and provides specific guidance on which metrics actually reveal the root cause versus which ones simply make you feel good. According to Crowell and Yoskovich, effective analytical capability requires distinguishing between vanity metrics and actionable metrics. Vanity metrics make you feel good but don't guide action. Things like total registered users, page views, or total social media followers. These numbers might grow while your business deteriorates. Actionable metrics reveal causal relationships and change how you behave based on what they tell you. Crowell and Yoskovich identify 4 properties that make metrics actionable. First, actionable metrics must be comparative. You can compare them across time periods, customer segments, channels, or other dimensions to understand what's driving change. Total revenue is less actionable than revenue by customer segment, by acquisition channel, over time, which reveals which segments and channels are improving or declining. Second, actionable metrics must be understandable. Everyone in the organisation interprets them in the same way. According to Crowell and Yoskovich research, vague metrics such as engagement or satisfaction hinder effective analysis because people contribute changes to different causes. Clear operational definitions enable shared understanding of what's being measured and why it matters. Third, actionable metrics must be ratios or rates rather than absolute numbers. Absolute numbers hide important patterns. Growing from 100 to 200 customers sound good. But if you're also growing from 1,000 to 4,000 trial users, your conversion rate actually declined from 10 to 5%, revealing a problem that raw growth numbers masked. Ratios expose causal relationships, absolutes conceal. Fourth, actionable metrics must change behaviour. They must be tied to specific actions that you can take based on the metric's findings. If a metric going up or down doesn't change what you do next, then it's not actionable. It's just interesting information. Crowell and Yoskovich emphasise the importance of cohort analysis for understanding causation. Instead of looking at aggregate metrics across all customers, track groups, cohorts based on where they were acquired, which channel they came from, or which product version they experienced. Cohort analysis isolates variables and reveals what's truly causal. For example, if the overall retention rate is 85%, that tells you nothing about causation. But if you analyse by cohort and discover that customers acquired in Q1 have 92% retention, Q2 customers have an 88% retention, Q3 customers have 82% retention, and Q4 customers have a 76% retention, you've identified that something changed over the year that's affecting retention. Now you can investigate what changed. Perhaps product quality declined, or you shifted to lower quality acquisition channels, or your ideal customer profile evolved, but the messaging didn't. According to Crowell and Yoskovich's framework, effective analytical capability requires building metric trees that connect leading indicators to lagging outcomes. Leading indicators change before lagging outcomes do, giving you predictive power. If you can identify that reduced feature adoption in the first week predicts churn 6 months later, then you found a leading indicator that enables earlier intervention. Crowell and Yoskovich introduced the concept of one metric that matters, OMTM, the single metric that captures the most critical factor limiting growth at your current state. According to their research, focusing on organisational attention on one primary metric accelerates learning about causation more effectively than tracking dozens of metrics simultaneously. The OMTM should be the metric that, if you moved it, would most directly address your current constraint. For different business models and growth stages, different metrics become the OMTM. In early stages, when you're validating whether you found a problem worth solving, engagement metrics matter most. Are people using the product regularly? In growth stages, acquisition and activation become critical. Are you efficiently converting awareness to active usage? In mature stages, revenue and efficiency metrics dominate. Are you generating sustainable unit economics? Kroll and Yoskovich framework involves 3 specific analytical approaches. First, variance analysis with context. When a metric changes, don't just note the change. Decompose it to understand which segments or dimensions drove the change. Revenue declined 15% is a symptom. Revenue declined 15%, down 20% in the enterprise segment, up 8% in the mid-market segment, flat in the SMB segment, points towards root causes about market positioning or competitive dynamics. Second, correlation versus causation testing. Kroll and Yoskovich warn that correlation is everywhere, but causation is rare. According to their research, the discipline required for analytical rigour is the systematic testing of whether apparent correlations represent genuine causal relationships. Just because metric E and metric B move together doesn't mean A causes B. They might be both caused by C, or the correlation could be coincidental. To test causation, Kroll and Yoskovich recommend controlled experiments whenever possible. Change one variable whilst holding the others constant and observe whether the predicted effects occur. This experimental approach moves you from correlation, because these things happen together, to causation. This change produced that effect. For CEOs with limited resources, small targeted experiments often reveal more about causation than extensive analysis of historical data. Third, validation of leading versus lagging relationships. According to Kroll and Yoskovich, powerful analytic capability builds predictive models by identifying which metrics reliably predict future outcomes. Test whether changes in early stage metrics like trial user engagement predict changes in later stage metrics like conversion to paid. If they do, you've found a causal pathway that enables earlier intervention. Kroll and Yoskovich emphasise that the value of analytics isn't in the sophistication of analysis tools, but in the clarity of thinking about what matters. According to their research, companies often implement elaborate analytics platforms that generate hundreds of reports while leaving fundamental questions about causation unanswered. The framework they provide distinguish between vanity and actionable metrics, using cohorts to isolate variables, building metric trees that connect leading indicators to lagging indicators, and focusing on the one metric that matters provides intellectual discipline regardless of technical capabilities. For you specifically, Kroll and Yoskovich framework suggests that stall growth typically shows up in leading indicators before it appears in lagging revenue numbers. By the time revenue growth has stalled, the causal factors have been in motion for months. Building analytical capability means instrumenting your leading indicators, engagement, activation, conversion quality, so you can identify and address emerging problems before they show up in revenue. According to their framework, effective analytics also requires honest examination of your assumptions. Kroll and Yoskovich found that organisations often continue measuring what they've always measured, even after their business model, market, or strategy has changed. The metrics that mattered when you were in a product-led growth at 5 million aren't necessarily the metrics that matter right now as enterprise sales led at 25 million. Sometimes the analytical work reveals that you're optimizing the wrong metrics entirely, measuring things that no longer drive the outcomes that you care about. The metrics, trees, and leading lagging relationships Kroll and Yoskovich help you serve multiple purposes beyond diagnosis. Once you've validated which leading indicators predict which outcomes, you have a predictive system. You can see problems coming quarters before they hit revenue. When you connect your strategic initiatives to specific metrics in your tree, you have progress tracking. You can monitor whether initiatives are moving the drivers they're supposed to move. When you include team health metrics in your trees, you have early warning systems for organisational dysfunction before it becomes a retention crisis. What you should have noticed is that these three frameworks converge on a core insight. Analytical capability isn't about collecting more data or building more dashboards. It's about building systematic infrastructure to understand causal relationships, what actually drives your performance rather than what merely correlates with it. Hubbard gives us the measurement foundation. Even seemingly immeasurable performance drivers can be quantified by decomposing them into observable components and strategically reducing uncertainty through targeted observation. His applied information economics framework helps you focus limited measurement resource on the high-value questions where reducing uncertainty mostly improves decision-making. Goldratt provides the systematic diagnostic tools, current reality trees for tracing multiple symptoms back to common root causes, effect cause-effect validation for testing whether you've identified true causation, and the recognition that organisational constraints shift over time. What enabled growth at one stage becomes what prevents it at the next. Kroll and Yoskovich show us how to build metric systems that reveal causation, distinguishing vanity metrics from actionable metrics, using cohort analysis to isolate variables, building metrics trees that connect leading indicators to lagging outcomes, and focusing organisational attention on the one metric that matters at your current stage. Here's how we apply these frameworks at Zocri. Break stalled growth into measurable components. Revenue growth decomposes into new customer acquisition and existing customer expansion. Customer acquisition breaks into lead generation, conversion rate, and sales cycle length. Each of those break even further down. Continue until you reach directly observable and measurable items. Then use the expected value of information calculation to identify which 3 to 5 measurements would most reduce your uncertainty about where to intervene. Second, build a current reality tree. List your visible symptoms, your undesirable effects. Map the cause and effect relationships connecting them. Trace back through multiple levels of causation rather than stopping at the first plausible explanation. Look for where multiple symptoms converge on common causes. These conversion points are your highest leverage intervention opportunities. Third, apply Kroll and Yoskovich discipline about actionable versus vanity metrics. For each metric you're tracking, ask, is this a comparative metric? Is this clearly defined? Is it a ratio or a rate? Does it change what we would do next? If not, stop tracking it. Focus measurement efforts on metrics that actually reveal causal relationships. Use cohort analysis to isolate variables, comparing customer segments, time periods, or acquisition channels to understand what's driving performance changes. Fourth, test your causal hypothesis rather than assuming correlation equals causation. If you believe factor A causes effect B, predict what other effects you should observe if that causal relationship is real. Look for those effects. Design small experiments that test whether changing A actually produces the predicted change in B. Fifth, build predictive capability by identifying leading indicators that change before lagging outcomes do. If reduced engagement in week 1 predicts churn in month 6, you've found an early warning system that enables intervention before the problem shows up in revenue. Validate these leading lagging relationships so you're working on predictions rather than reactions. Now, whilst we focused on root cause analytics because that's typically the burning need, when you're new to the CEO role, the capability you're building serves much broader purposes. The same metrics trees help you diagnose why conversion rates declined, also give you predictive power. Leading indicators that signal problems before they show up in revenue. The 3-layer framework that usually connects causes to outcomes becomes your system for tracking strategic progress through key results. You can see whether initiatives are actually moving the drivers you expected them to. And the discipline of building causal metrics create models visible into the team health indicators, engagement, capacity, coordination, effectiveness, before they deteriorate into turnover crises. You don't just want to fix the immediate problem, you want to build an analytical infrastructure that prevents growth from ever stalling. That means measurement systems don't just diagnose why did this happen, but also answer what's likely to happen next. Is our strategy actually working as intended? And where are the early warning signs of team dysfunction? The frameworks we've covered are capabilities that compound over time across all of these applications. Here's the question to consider. Pick one performance outcome that matters most to restarting growth right now. Can you trace the causal chain from that outcome back through the immediate drivers to those root causes? Do you have actionable metrics that reveal causation, or are you tracking vanity metrics that simply describe symptoms? And are you measuring what actually drives outcome, or optimizing metrics that worked at a previous growth stage but no longer determined success?